What's going on, my fellow rock and rollers? Don't forget to hit the bell notification icon to be notified every time I put out a new video on my channel. I've previously talked about the Kiss reunion tour in 1996, but more in relation to the fact that it represented the last tour Alice in Chains would do with frontman Lane Staley. But today I want to talk about how Kiss reunited with their classic lineup and why it was such a failure. Stay tuned for the full story. Who would have thought it would be rapper Tupac Shakur who would have introduced the reunited lineup of Kiss to the world? It was the 1996 Grammy Awards, and the rapper introduced the band with Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss, who strolled on stage in full Kiss makeup. And they were there to present the award for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with vocal. To some, the appearance and announcement of a reunited Kiss wasn't a huge surprise, as the writing was on the wall a year prior when in August of 1995, Ace Frehley and Peter Criss played several Kiss songs during the band's MTV Unplugged appearance. What followed after the Grammys appearance was an 18-month-long tour that featured 192 shows. It was something that seemed unimaginable a few years earlier. So how did Kiss reunite, and what happened afterwards? While Kiss would rise to fame in the mid to late 70s, by the early 80s, the band's original and classic lineup was falling apart. The decade was a difficult time for Kiss. By 1982, Peter Criss and Ace Frehley were out of the band, and they were replaced. Soon afterwards, the band lost their makeup for a period of time, and Gene Simmons seemed to have a diminishing role in the group as he pursued other interests like acting, which I've talked about in another video. As a result, guitarist and vocalist Paul Stanley took a greater role in leading the band, and by the late 80s, early 90s, Kiss was struggling with their identity as rock and roll underwent a massive transformation with the rise of alternative rock. In addition to that, Kiss didn't have a top 10 charting record the whole decade. By 1991, Kiss was also dealing with tragedy as drummer Eric Carr was found to have a tumor in his heart. While he would be declared cancer-free towards the later part of 1991, he would die on November 24th due to several cerebral hemorrhages. Coincidentally, he passed away on the same day as Queen frontman Freddie Mercury. Carr would be replaced by Alice Cooper's drummer Eric Singer, with some fans blasting the band for continuing on, something Simmons brushed off telling Classic Rock magazine. Some fans thought we were insensitive. How could the band continue? Why didn't you love him? But they weren't there. They're not qualified to say, Simmons would remember. As the band turned their attention to their first record of the 90s, they enlisted producer Bob Ezrin, who also worked on the band's seminal record, 1975's Destroyer. The band had hoped to repeat the same success with a more back-to-basics approach, something that partially worked. Appropriately titled Revenge and released in 1992, it was the band's first album since 1979's Dynasty to chart in the top 10, even if it didn't have legs. At the end of the day, it sold around 500,000 copies, which meant it went gold, but relatively speaking, the big bands at the time outsold Kiss many times over. For comparison, Nirvana's Nevermind sold over 11 million copies in the US. The band would release a stopgap live record titled Alive 3 to tide over fans until their next release. Kiss would soon enlist the help of Alice in Chains producer Toby Wright, who had worked on the band on their 1994 EP Jar of Flies, which was a #1 hit. Wright would recall to classic rock. They wanted to follow a little hip trend going on at the time called grunge music. The bottom line was, like all artists, they wanted to sell records. I remember getting into a big argument with Gene about the direction of the album. He said he wanted to be like that bald guy, the one that's on top of the charts. He meant Billy Corgan. The album would end up getting shelved for several years, and it would turn out Kiss had gotten a huge offer to reunite with the original lineup, and the album was shelved according to Wright. The reunited lineup of Kiss played their first show at Tiger Stadium in 1996 in June of that year. Opening for the band would be Alice in Chains, and Gene had reservations about opening the tour at such a big venue because he was worried there wouldn't be enough interest in the band to sell out the baseball stadium. He was fortunately wrong, as the band sold 50,000 tickets that night in Detroit in just a matter of hours. And the first show went great, with guitarist Ace Frehley recalling in his book No Regrets, the closer it came to showtime, the more of a strange sense of deja vu permeated the air. From the moment we hit the stage, 40,000 screaming fans stood up, and the excitement continued until the final encore. When the show was over, we congratulated each other backstage. There was a genuine feeling of camaraderie in the dressing room, and the tour would go on to be one of the most successful tours of the group's career, raking in $144 million. With touring out of the way, the next thing for the reunited lineup was to do a new album, but that's where things started to get problematic. The shelved album Carnival of Souls finally saw its release months after the reunion tour ended, but it didn't feature Peter Criss or Ace Frehley. The album quickly faded from memory, and the reunited lineup turned their attention to their follow-up record, which would be their first together since 1979's Dynasty. While Paul and Gene claimed they wanted Ace and Peter to play on the record, according to the book Kiss Behind the Mask, it would be the band's producer Bruce Fairbairn who wanted to bring outside musicians to play on the album, as he wasn't impressed with Ace and Peter's playing in pre-production. In fact, Ace and Peter only played on a handful of songs on what would be their so-called reunion record, 1998's Psycho Circus. Fairbairn would recruit several musicians to play on the album, including drummer Eric Singer and guitarist Tommy Thayer, who appeared on most of the record. Thayer apparently helped Ace relearn his original guitar parts for the reunion tour, and former Kiss guitarist Bruce Kulick also reportedly chipped in with guitar and bass work on 2 tracks. According to Criss, who spoke to Eddie Trunk, the only song to feature contributions from all 4 original members was the song Into the Void. Both Ace and Peter were hurt by their lack of involvement in Psycho Circus, with Criss revealing in his book Makeup to Breakup, Ace and I were both working on songs diligently, but then once again our hopes were shattered. They were offering us $850,000 each not to play. Frehley would put part of the blame on Gene and Paul, telling Disc Dive, "It was a disappointment for me. The only song I performed on was the one I wrote, Into the Void. Paul and Gene are such control freaks, and I don't know why I wasn't invited to play on a lot of the other songs, but I wasn't." But in reality, Ace actually played on several other songs despite his quote. Paul Stanley would have his own recollection of events, telling Chris Jericho on his Talk is Jericho podcast how both Ace and Peter wanted to be equal partners, something Stanley disagreed with. In addition to that, he stated the following: "When they came back, they were pretty broke, and we can take pretty out of that. And yet it wasn't too long after things started to happen again that they started doing the same stuff, and it just became ugly and no fun. You've got guys who are trying to renegotiate deals and they're trying to talk to lawyers more than we're talking to them. And this idea of I should have this many songs on the album, and honestly, I've been writing songs for 50 years. I've gotten pretty good at what I do, so it just became ugly and sad," he'd remember. And while Psycho Circus wasn't the Kiss reunion album fans were hoping for, it wasn't a bad album. The album peaked at number 3 on the Billboard charts, selling over 110,000 copies in its first week, and received mostly favorable reviews. But the band did hit some trouble a week after the record came out. The song Dreamin' displayed some similarities to the Alice Cooper song I'm 18, and Cooper's publisher filed a lawsuit against Kiss, and they would settle the dispute out of court. As the band turned their attention to supporting the album on tour in 1998, tensions were brewing once again. The tour to support Psycho Circus failed to garner the public's attention compared to their previous tour, and as a result, the ticket sales suffered. In addition to that, squabbles over money only escalated with Peter and Ace. And in 2000, Kiss announced their farewell tour, but it wasn't the group's last trek. Instead, according to Stanley, who told Chris Jericho, the farewell tour was us wanting to put Kiss out of its misery. And for a while, honestly, we lost sight that we didn't have to stop, we had to get rid of them. According to Classic Rock magazine, Frehley failed to show up for rehearsals, blaming Lyme disease, and at one show in California, he walked backstage only to find Tommy Thayer wearing his spaceman costume ready to take his place. But for drummer Peter Criss, things came to a head on October 7, 2000 in Charleston, South Carolina. The drummer, according to Rolling Stone magazine, had learned that guitarist Ace Frehley was getting paid $50,000 a show, a full $10,000 more than Criss's own salary. Criss would remember in his memoir, "It was the most devastating blow of my professional life. I was so hurt I thought I was going to have a heart attack," he'd remember. And there were only 7 shows remaining on that tour, but Criss that night in South Carolina had a meltdown on stage and destroyed his drum kit, sending a tom-tom rolling towards Stanley. Criss wrote in his book, "Everyone stood up and cheered, and Paul thought the cheers were for him until he turned around and saw a huge tom-tom coming down at him. So he took his guitar, threw it down on stage, and walked off." And this would be the last time the classic lineup performed together on stage. Drummer Eric Singer would finish up the remainder of the tour, with Ace Frehley's final show with Kiss occurring on April 13, 2001 in Australia. And while Frehley briefly rejoined the band during the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, he would be gone after that. And when the band hit the road again in 2002, promoters insisted that 3 of the 4 original members appear on stage, so Paul and Gene reluctantly invited Criss to rejoin. Following that tour being over, Criss once again left the band. In 2014, Kiss would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the 4 original members joined each other on stage, but the band declined to perform that evening. And in 2018, as part of the Kiss Cruise, the band did reunite with Ace Frehley to perform a handful of songs along with Bruce Kulick. In 2019, Kiss announced the end of the Road Tour, which was supposed to be the band's very last tour. Kicking off in Canada, many fans wondered whether Peter and Ace would be involved, something manager Doc McGee claimed the band would be open to doing. The tour was supposed to run until 2021, with their final shows occurring in New York City, but obviously due to everything that's going on right now, the tour has been postponed partway through. So that does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe. We'll see you again tomorrow on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.